Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fifth chapter of the BELEM webinars, the capacitation building webinars. This stands for Boosting European Lyrics via Entrepreneurial Monetization and is a project co-funded by the European Union. My name is David Serras. I'm the licensing and international manager for Unison Rights, who is a beneficiary of this project. And our goal is to capacitate you to understand how to properly document, distribute, and monetize your lyrics. So this is the fifth chapter. Please address to our website and social media to check for the former four chapters in which we covered what is music publishing, the overview of the project, the lyrics and rights, and the history of lyrics. And lyrics and rights part one is exactly chapter four. So please go there, see if there are any doubts, please reach us, and we will give you a dedicated and separate mentoring session. So we'll cover the exceptions to the authorizations. As we've said in our former chapters, each use of lyrics needs a prior authorization by the rights holder, either the songwriter, composer, or lyricist, or by the music publisher who controls the rights. But there are instances where the use of lyrics may fall under a fair use and a license may not be necessary. In the US, fair use is determined on a case-by-case basis and takes into account factors such as the purpose and nature of the use, the amount and substantiability of the portion used, and the effect on the market value of the original work. In Europe, there's no fair use logic. There's normally a closed list of exceptions which follows the Berne Convention three-step test, and we use that. And for more details on Berne Convention, also check our former chapters. The three-step test of the Berne Convention, which is implemented in European horizontal legislation and also in member states' legal frameworks, means a provision that outlines the limitations and exceptions to copyright protection. It is a key aspect of international copyright law and is included in several international treaties, including the Berne Convention for the Protection of Literary and Artistic Works and the WTO Agreement on Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property called the TRIPS Agreement. The three-step test is designed to strike a balance between the rights of the copyright holder or owner and the interests of users in accessing and using copyrighted work. It is used by courts and policymakers to determine the scope of exceptions and limitations to copyright protection and to ensure that they are applied in a fair and reasonable manner. As a professor once told me, every time you are granting someone with an exclusive right, with a monopoly, you are preventing millions of others of using it. Therefore, they must be considered very carefully. The three-step test sets out the framework for determining whether a particular use of a copyrighted work, let's put it a lyric, falls under the scope of an exception or limitation to copyright protection, and the test consists of three parts. The use must be limited to certain special cases, the closed catalog of exceptions. This means that exceptions to copyright protection should only apply in certain specific circumstances, such as educational, scientific, or research purposes. The use must not conflict with the normal exploitation of the work, and this means that exceptions to copyright protection should not undermine the economic value of the original work or harm the legitimate interests of the copyright owner. And last, the use must not unreasonably prejudice the legitimate interests of the copyright owner. And this means that exceptions to copyright protection should not harm the copyright owner in a way that is disproportionate to the benefit gained by the user. Let's talk about the legal framework and main instruments that you have to know and be attentive to when you are dealing with music lyrics and licensing and copyright. So in Europe, there are several main copyright treaties, conventions, and directives and regulations in force that govern copyright law and the protection of intellectual property rights. And these include the Berne Convention, of which we've talked deeply in this chapter and the former chapters, And this is an international treaty which was first established in 1886 and establishes the basic standards for copyright protection in participating countries, including the protection of literary and artistic works. Then we have the WIPO Copyright Treaty. This treaty, which was established in 1996, provides additional protections for copyrighted works in the digital age, including protections for digital rights management systems and the prevention of unauthorized distribution of works online. Those are called the Internet Treaties. The Information Society Directive, or as we call them in legal jargon, the InfoSoc Directive. So this is the Directive 29/2001 and is the directive on the harmonization of certain aspects of copyright and related rights in the information society. It was adopted in 2001 and it was harmonized into EU copyright law to account for the rapid developments in the digital technology and in the internet. This so-called InfoSoc directive was and is very important because it introduced several new provisions, including the exclusive right of reproduction, and it established the exclusive right for the copyright owners to authorize or prohibit the reproduction of their works in any form, including digital formats, the right of communication to the public. The directive established the exclusive right of copyright owners to authorize or prohibit the communication of their works to the public, including through the internet and digital means, and the limitations and exceptions to copyright, because it introduced new limitations and exceptions to copyright law, including for purposes such as education, research, and private copying. Naturally, the rights of reproduction and the rights of communication to the public were already included in international treaties. This was the framework that harmonized in Europe through a directive all of those rights and introduced new rights and new exceptions. So the directive, the InfoSoc directive, was amended several times, and most recently with the adoption of the EU Copyright Directive in 2019, which further updated the harmonized EU copyright law in the single market. This EU Copyright Directive, which was adopted in 2019, among other things, established new rules for copyright protection in the digital single market, including the creation of a new right for press publishers and, what is important for us here, the increased liability for online platforms that host copyrighted content. It was the discussion on the infamous Article 13, the TOV discussion, transfer of value discussion, and that became Article 17 of the directive. Other not so relevant provisions or legal instruments include the EU Satellite and Cable Directive, and this directive, which was adopted in 1993, establishes the rules for the cross-border transmission of television and radio broadcasts, including provisions for copyright protection and licensing. Also, the EU Audiovisual Media Services Directive, which was adopted in 2010 and establishes rules for the provision of audiovisual media services, including the protection of copyright and related rights. And last, the regulation on the exercise of copyright and related rights applicable to certain online transmissions of broadcasting organizations and retransmission of television and radio programs. The regulation establishes a new framework for the licensing and remuneration of broadcasters and retransmission operators for the use of their content and introduce new rights and obligations for both parties. It is important to notice that in the first and the last instrument, there are several provisions that contain mandatory collective rights management by traditional or CMOs and cannot be managed by IMEs or private entities, and those are included in these provisions or these legal instruments. This is the end of our second part of lyrics and rights, and we welcome you to watch our next chapter, which is called the International Organizations. Thank you very much to everyone who've watched this. We are totally available. Reach us for doing private mentoring, dedicated sessions that will explain and that will help you deal with documenting, distributing, and monetizing your lyrics. Thank you very much.